I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage, but the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No, no room for hate. No room for hate. You can wave a flag above it, you can quote a verse or two, you can dress it up like justice till it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start where the anger breaks.
Where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up where the hurt gives way.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
Not in Jesus' name. Oh, not in this house. Not in this heart. Not in His name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny? Movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight. Entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST. The future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
In uncertain times, we could use someone to lean on. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma will stand by you with plan options to fit your budget. If you've recently lost your job, had a baby, or moved, you can still get the healthcare coverage you and your family need. Financial help may be available for those who qualify. Call 855-452-BLUE or visit hereforyouok.com to see if you're eligible to enroll. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma, a division of Healthcare Service Corporation, a mutual legal reserve company.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Pardon my oops. Hello. Helps if I drop the right slide. Pardon my air drumming. Good Wednesday. Nearly afternoon, I guess. For you guys, I guess East Coast it's noon, so you guys are at lunch. I think I'm confused. Did I just start at my normal time? Yes, as a matter of fact, I did. That's why everything seems weird. I forgot. I slid everything an hour later on purpose as a test yesterday or Monday, and then started on time today instead of giving myself the extra hour. I was wondering why all the numbers seemed off already, and I'm like, wait a minute, dummy, you moved to 1 to 3 as a test, and then you started on time. Your old time. So test failed. I guess we'll wait until next Wednesday and try again, because reasons. Anyway, so for those of you that were expecting me to be on at like noon my time, I apologize. I'm here a little early. I fell into old habits and was goofing off and making show notes, and I'm like, it's time to hit the button. And I was like, wait, you gave yourself an extra hour as a test on Monday and it worked. And now we're reinforcing the fact that it worked, because so far nobody's seen us on YouTube yet. Anyway, although I did just get an update that apparently YouTube is changing its algorithms. Anyway, back to the intro. Now that I realize why I was mentally confused for a moment there. I know. Some of you that know me were like, for a moment, you say. Yeah, I got 2 words for you. One of them rhymes with truck.
Show where we say what we feel.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
All right, and once again, officially welcome into the Chat Lives Matter Day, Wednesday Hump Day edition of the Rick Robinson Show. I am the man, the myth, the legend himself, Rick Robinson. I hope everybody's having a great Wednesday. And yes, I know those are all titles I call myself in my own mind because nobody else cares enough. That's okay. I understand that. It's all good. All right, so believe it or not, what I'm about to rant about actually kind of ties in to the topic for today. But so I saw something last night that severely just made me angry, and I see most of X agreed with me because it's been trending ever since. So Amazon made an announcement that they were going to launch a sequel to Stargate, basically with a jumping off point that would include all of the original canon. Some of the original folks that wanted to make appearances would be able to do so, but they were going to try to bring it back to hopefully bring in a younger audience. However, I have a thought on that, but we'll get to that in a second. So what happened was, after they made the announcement, made the announcement and went direct to production, the writers have already started writing the scripts, and then Amazon decided the new show format wasn't going to be inclusive enough, so they've killed it. Now, I missed something when I started ranting about this yesterday, so apparently they haven't completely killed it. Their thought process is they're going to try to potentially bring in another showrunner. My guess would be Kurtzman, since his contract at Paramount Plus is about to be up and they're not going to be renewing it, to try to make a more inclusive version of Stargate. Now, my problem with that is every time anybody starts using the word inclusive in anything, it dies. It dies slowly, painfully, and with all of its fans lamenting its death. What was once known as 2 golden franchises are basically on life support, and fans at this point are just like, can we just pull the plug because you've killed them and I don't know if they can be saved. Those would be Star Trek and Star Wars. They became the inclusive test beds for all of the things. But here's what I find most interesting, and this is why I'm saying eventually this will tie into today's topic. The folks at MGM, Amazon, basically decided that it wasn't inclusive enough. So my question is, when did America start having its own version of a Politburo? Because that's what's happening right now. These things are not passing the Politburo test. They're not pushing the right messages. What happened to free speech in this country? Where did it go? When did it die? Because trust me, at this point, because here's the thing, Stargate lasted forever. It started out on Showtime, then it moved over to Sci-Fi, and yes, some of the stuff they did with it later kind of started moving into the Fonzie jumping the shark territory of Happy Days. But it ran for 11 seasons, the primary, and then we had Atlantis, which ran for a while. And then we had Stargate Universe, which ran for a while. And honestly, the only reasons that those 2 parts of the franchise ended the way they did and ended rather abruptly was because the parent company had to file bankruptcy. Now, that is not a problem of the franchises. That is a problem of the management not being able to do their primary job because it's kind of in their title and being able to properly manage money. They had monetary gold mines. For anybody who's ever done anything like what I do, the idea of being able to capture lightning in a bottle more than once is an anomaly. And they did it not once, not twice, but thrice. Same thing with Star Trek. No matter, trust me, anybody remember the movies? Remember the old axiom, even-numbered Trek films don't suck? There's a reason that came to be. The first one was Gene Roddenberry trying to do what he did with the original pilot, which was make it way too cerebral for the target audience to understand. But he got to make most of what he wanted his love child to be. And people still went to see it. It cost way more money. So then we got a stripped down version of Star Trek 2 with some very large plot holes now that I am able to come back as an adult and watch it and go, you're telling me the science officer didn't realize that in a system that used to have 6 planets, there are now only 5? I find that hard to believe. And then there were other things too, but it was still, at the time it was in the theaters, a very entertaining show or movie to watch. And it elevated Star Trek to a new position, one that it hadn't held before, because of the rabid fan base that came through once it went into syndication. I know, because I wasn't alive when Star Trek ran first. But I do remember sitting down and watching it with my dad when I was a kid in syndication, in reruns. And it was something that we had in common, that we talked about all the time. And it was rare for us because my dad was more of a gearhead, metalhead kind of guy, and I never really was. I'm more of an electronics kid, always have been. I enjoy electronics. You give me something electronic, I can take it apart and put it back together. You put me in front of a car, and I'm like, I don't know where this goes. But part of that, again, is I grew up in the generation where if you didn't hold the flashlight just right for your dad when you're trying to help him change spark plugs, you not only got told about it, you felt it. So it wasn't anything that I ever really enjoyed doing. But I was able to teach myself how to take electronics apart and put it back together. And I did that at a very young age with a stereo that my dad gave me, and he came in right in the middle of me putting it back together in my bedroom floor, and he's like, it better work when you get done or else. That's all he said. And by the time I got done putting it back together, it still worked. And that's when I figured out, hey, I do have some aptitude for things like that. I just prefer working on other mediums. So back to what I was talking about, though. We have a Politburo now in America, and this ties into the rest of what we're going to be talking about today, because I submit the kids are not all right. And I'm going to tell you why today. Now, this doesn't mean that I think that every person of a certain age is running towards communism or socialism, but there's a good bit of folks that do. So again, welcome in. This is, again, the Rick Robinson Show. I'm glad all of you that are here. I am starting to see a few people trickle in. I really wish I had given myself the extra hour runway just to see if it would have done the same thing or not, but I guess we'll have a valid test of whether it was that or just something else that made Monday's show completely take off for a few minutes. So today we start with a question that sounds fairly simple, but it's actually not. Do the youth of the day prefer communism over capitalism? Now, that I'm going to admit, that's the kind of question that can turn into a cheap talk radio grenade real fast. You can yell, the kids are all Marxist, and everybody gets mad on the internet, starts flipping tables and throwing chairs. Hi, Chipotle. Oh, wait, sorry. And nobody learns anything. That is not what we're doing today. No, I do not think that every 22-year-old in America is sitting around reading Karl Marx and plotting to nationalize the local Chick-fil-A, but I do think something has changed, and that change, while slow, has become dramatic. Too many young Americans hear socialism and think compassion. They hear capitalism and think rent, debt, groceries, bad jobs, and a future locked behind a paywall. That's not just an economic problem. That is an education problem, a cultural problem, and a political problem. And that's where today's title comes from, because the kids, ladies and gentlemen, they are not all right. And I do not mean that as a mockery. I mean it as an analytical point. They're not all right economically. They're not all right educationally. They are not all right civically. And they're not all right in terms of institutional trust. And they are not all right because a lot of institutions that were supposed to prepare them for adulthood instead handed them grievance, debt, confusion, and slogans fit for bumper stickers. So today we're going to walk through this very carefully, and we're going to start with the polling. Then we're going to look at education, academia, teachers unions, activists, nonprofits, DSA and DSA-styled organizations, big city government, no bail and soft on crime policy, and then sprinkle in what last night's primaries actually showed us. And let me put the guardrails up early. I'm not saying every young person is a communist, or are they? I'm not saying every protester is paid, or are they? I'm not saying every Democrat is DSA, but they might in fact be DSA light or DSA adjacent. I'm not saying there is an ecosystem, but I am saying there is an ecosystem. And when you look at the polling, the schools, the universities, the unions, the activist networks, the city governments, the criminal justice experiments, and then the election results, a pattern starts to show up. The worldview comes from one place, the anger comes from another, the organization comes from another. The policy shows up in the cities, and then everybody acts shocked when young people start flirting with ideologies that should have been buried under the ruins they created. And that is where that's the trip we're going to be taking today. Because again, ladies and gentlemen, the kids are not all right, but as of right now, they're not lost yet either. And if the right wants to win them back, it has to do more than yell Marxist at people who cannot afford rent. So let's start with the question again. Do young Americans prefer communism over capitalism? The honest answer is no, but not as a clean majority. But the warning light is currently flashing. Big red flashing lights saying, hey, why do so many young kids like these ideas when every time they try, they have failed? And then you get the folks that are behind the DSA and the DSA adjacent accounts going, well, real socialism's never actually failed because it's never really been tried. So the bigger issue here is that capitalism is not being understood by a lot of young people as freedom, ownership, entrepreneurship, private property rights, building something, keeping what you earn, starting a family, buying a home, opening a shop, and creating a life for yourself that matches what it is that you thought you wanted your life to be. That is not what they are picturing. For a lot of them, capitalism means rent they cannot afford, student loans they can't escape, groceries that feel like a financial ambush. Now, these are the same kids that are actually, financing pizza. So let that sink in for a second. Healthcare bills, big companies laying people off while executives get bonuses, a degree that costs too much and bought too little, a starter home that now looks like a museum exhibit from a civilization that no longer exists. So when you ask them, do you like capitalism? Some of them do not hear, do you like freedom and property rights? They hear, do you like the system where your paycheck gets mugged by rent before it even makes it to your checking account? Never mind the fact that it also gets raped by the government before it ever makes it to your checking account. Which is why I keep saying we don't really live in a completely capitalistic society anymore. And that's why none of this works anymore. Because you can't blend the two. These two ideologies cannot coexist in the same space at the same time. And the progressives won the argument starting way back in 1913, 1914-ish when they convinced the Republicans that, hey, we need that tax back. Now, this isn't anything that happened slowly or quickly. This happened very slowly. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of a history refresher as we go here as well. So the breaks may be a little off today, but we're going to get through it all, especially since I started earlier than I intended. So if we run a little long, it won't really matter. But here's the thing. So we had an income tax, a progressive income tax, for the first time that I ever remember seeing or hearing about in history back during the Civil War, because there was money that was required that we didn't have. So, but after the Civil War, because it was a temporary tax, they ended it. So ever since the end of the Civil War, up until around 1913, 1914-ish, every 2 years, a fresh crop of Democrats, along with some folks that were holdovers from the previous 2 years, would come back to the Republican Party and say, hey, guys, you remember when we had that wonderful progressive income tax and we could do all these things without having to run back to the American people and say, hey, we need you to buy treasury bonds so we can finish our pet projects. Yeah, you remember those days? Those were awesome. And Republicans for the longest time kept saying, no. It was temporary for a reason. We don't need it. They're not going to want it. But just like Spike and the little dog from the cartoons, the little dog kept yep. And then eventually the Republicans said, you know what? Let's just do this. Let's leave it up to the American people, because surely they are going to be smart enough to not let you turn them over and shake their pockets. So we will put it on the ballot and let them decide. And it became a constitutional referendum to add an amendment. And then the Democrats used the very same line that they have been using for now over 100 years. This new tax will not affect you. This new tax is a 2% tax on the most wealthy 1% of Americans, so you're never even going to notice. And everybody looked at the rich people and said, it's about time I got some of that money. And they said, sure, let's do this damn thing. And now look at our tax rates. Now they have been all over the place ever since the progressive income tax code was set up. At one point, the highest tax rate counting everything, including city taxes, state taxes, etc., it was around 90%. Nobody talks about that part. Nobody talks about that part. But this is part of the problem, because you have one group of folks who are now not even hiding the fact that they want to be socialist. And they used to be very subversive and quiet and sneaky about it. And they would just keep wearing the other side down. And unfortunately, the Republicans, ever since their inception, have always considered themselves the little brothers to the Democrats, because the Democratic Party was around from before. So they have always tried to seek the approval of what they consider their big brother, which is why we've run into so many issues throughout history. I'm not going to go through all of those again, because I've gone through a lot of them before. But this ties into everything, because again, the idea of capitalism and progressive socialism / communism, those two ideologies are incompatible and they cannot exist in the same space at the same time. Much like we're now finding between the ideologies of Islam and Christianity, those two things are antithetical to one another and can't survive in the same space at the same time for very long. And we're seeing, unfortunately, across the pond, they are losing that fight. But that's why some of this becomes so important, because oddly enough, communists, socialists, and Islamists make really strange bedfellows, but it's the old enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. Remember Sun Tzu? So yeah. So this is where the left has been very clever when we go back to that, kids not really liking capitalism very much because they don't understand how it works. The left does not sell socialism as state control of production. It sells it as equalness, fairness, or even equality or equity. It sells it as compassion. It sells it as somebody finally noticing that young people are broke and angry. That's the bait. But the switch is always the same. The solution is more state power, more centralized control, more government management, more redistribution, and then even more and more and more redistribution, and then more bureaucrats to help with the more and more redistribution, which creates this, dependency and even more dependency. More people who have never built anything telling the people who built things how much they are allowed to keep. And you know how I know all of this ties together? There's an interesting study that just came out today showing that in America, the average male between the ages of 18 and 30 has a declining work ethic, because the idea of being a actual productive male masculine member of society is being frowned upon. Not to mention all the government handouts that are now available if you can find a way to tweak the system. So we're in trouble all over the place, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why we're having this discussion today. And here is where conservatives have to be honest. Just screaming Marxist at young people is not going to fix that. All right, I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be right back. I have dogs barking. I need to see what's going on.
I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage. But the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. dress it up like justice, till it almost sounds like truth. But our rage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start where the anger breaks.
Where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up where the hurt gives way.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No.
All right, I apologize for that sloppy transition. First of all, I need to figure out how to tell Amazon to not deliver packages from a certain time to a certain time. But then again, if I'd started at noon my time like I planned on, that wouldn't have mattered. Anyway. Yeah, I guess since I have that song set up a very specific way, it wouldn't let me add myself in so I could drop the volume and make a smooth transition. Anyway, so we're back. We're live. We may still take a break in a few minutes because that was an unscheduled one. But I do want to get back on track before I get too much more confused. All right. So, and yes, Denny, they have messed up a lot of things. And thank you for what you just said. So here's the problem. You know, again, when we left rather unexpectedly because of a delivery, more people who have never built anything telling the people who build things how much they are allowed to keep. And that happens a lot on the left. Happens a lot more even on the right than it ever really should. And here's where conservatives have to be honest, because again, just screaming Marxist at young people, that's not going to fix it. It's fun, and it's more often than not true, but it's still not going to fix anything. If a 25-ish year old person cannot afford rent, but I have a caveat with that. You want to know how I know that we have been living in one of the most abundant times ever? Most of these people that are just coming of age have no concept of what a roommate would be. So up until now, there have been people that have been moving out of mommy's and daddy's basements at around 25, 26 years old and finding a place of their own. That isn't how things worked in the 80s and the 90s. I had roommates until I got married, because it was the only way to make things work. So again, if a 25-year-old cannot afford rent, cannot afford a home of their own, cannot imagine having kids, is working 2 jobs and thinks the system is rigged against normal people, you cannot just pat them on the head and say, have you considered reading Milton Friedman? But you can remind them that when we were kids, we couldn't afford our own rented place or own home most of the time either. We had to go in and cohabitate with people and share expenses. And yes, even sometimes work 2 and 3 jobs. When I was in college, I had 3 part-time jobs around trying to keep my college schedule, because it was the only way that I could afford to do the things that I needed to do. So these are not new problems. These problems have always existed. The problem, the thing that has changed is now, instead of looking at ourselves and figuring out how we can fix them, we go to the government and say, please, can you fix this for us? And then all that ever does is make it worse. But it's been happening that way by design. So no, I'm not faulting the kids. I'm not faulting the kids for believing what they've been taught, but that's also part of the problem. And we're going to get into that later, because here's the thing. This is very simple. It's very simple. We have to stop looking to the government for every single solution. That's the entire reason this country was founded in the first place. And if we're going to have that conversation, this year seems to be the perfect time to have it again, since we're supposed to be celebrating its 250th birthday this year, and almost nobody wants to. But we've talked about that too. I did an entire show about that and why on Monday, and this was the next logical offshoot, because there are reasons all of this is happening the way that it is, and some of it is happening by design. So what we have to do, and I did this with my kids, and remember, I'm old. I'm 53. My kids are all adults now. They're all off building their own lives. But even when my kids were going to school in the late 90s, early 2000s, and even later into the 2010s, they hated me, because when I figured out civics wasn't being taught, I made them learn it at home. Because it was one of the easiest ways to explain to them why freedom is better than dependency. If they understood why our founding fathers did the things that they did and the reasons why they took the steps that they took, and they were able to understand why freedom matters and why you don't want to let anybody take that away from you, I knew it was going to prepare them more for life. And guess what? They have all to a person come back to me and said, Dad, I know I yelled and screamed and threw a fit when you were reading to me about the Constitution and forcing me to understand how to read cursive, even though they weren't making us write it anymore. But thank you, because everybody around me that is my own age has no idea how this country works, and I do. A lot of them have gone on to become very successful. My youngest is actually considering following in my footsteps and has recently applied to a local police department. So, again, you have to explain why freedom is better than dependency. But this becomes another problem, because a lot of, and I'm not necessarily, I don't want to paint myself as being perfect, because there were a lot of things, because I was busy off building a business and trying to raise a family and trying to keep food on the table and all these other things. There were things that slipped through the cracks back then, even for me. But the other problem that we have is most of America has now abdicated the responsibilities of teaching the children about things to their schools and their teachers, and almost nothing is discussed in the home anymore. There's no family history being passed down. There's no oral traditions being passed down. There's no, well, this is why America is awesome being talked about around the family dinner table, because there is no family dinner table anymore. And even in the rare exceptions that there are, there's a very small percentage that aren't glued to their phones the entire time they're supposedly eating dinner. Our society has changed in so many different ways. And this is why, as I pointed out the other day, I am of two minds as we move more staunchly into the information age, because it has given me the ability to do the very things that I do to now make a living and put food on the table and all the other things that I used to have to do other things to do. But at the same time, it has created this sense of dependency and this need for government intervention. And it's astounding. We talked about this last night on Men Explained Poorly. We have, and I've talked about this on other shows, we have at our fingertips and usually in our pockets more computing power than was used to launch the space shuttle or to send man to the moon, and we don't use it for anything other than watching cat videos. That's bad. But again, this is why this is all worded the way that it is, and I'm going to get back into it in a second. You have to explain why freedom is better than dependency. Not your child's school, not your child's teacher, but you. You have to explain why property and property rights matter. You have to explain why small business is different from corporate cronyism, because they are. You have to explain why markets actually work when you allow them to, why socialism fails, and why every system that promises heaven through government eventually discovers it needs force to get there. And that is the first part of the show, because young people did not wake up one morning and spontaneously decide that communism was cool. Something taught them to look at capitalism with suspicion and socialism with curiosity. And that brings us to education. But before we get there, let's sprinkle in the first piece from last night. In California's governor's primaries race, Republican Steve Hilton and Democrat Xavier Becerra were leading the field, while Tom Steyer, the billionaire progressive socialist climate activist donor class celebrity, walking LinkedIn page for elite progressive politics, was trailing in third. Now that matters because if this was just a clean socialist or progressive tidal wave, Tom Steyer should have been surfing it. But this is where it gets interesting because let's not forget, California, as I call it, commie failure, has very liberal mail-in voting laws, meaning that you can actually submit, as long as it was postmarked as of yesterday, a mail-in ballot. So yes, right now, it looks like California is trying to wake up and at least allow a Republican on the ballot. I have a sneaking suspicion that 7 days from now, we will be having a different conversation, but I hope that I am wrong. Now, again, that matters for now because it shows that California is trying to make changes. Now, my question becomes, will the mechanism that Californians have surrendered to allow them to make those changes? So let's be fair, at least for the moment. Last night did not prove the far left is sweeping everything, because they're not, but it also did not prove that the far left is dead. And again, whether it's on life support or not will kind of be determined by what happens in the next week, especially in California. It proved the Democratic coalition is in a fight. Establishment Democrats, progressive activists, Democratic socialists, union power, donor money, celebrity outsiders, and voters who are just tired of the cost of everything are all colliding. That is the environment young people are swimming in, and that is why today's question matters. And again, the kids are not all right, but sadly, the reason is not a simple one. They were taught the complaint, not the cost, which leads us into the education lane. I want to say this very carefully because this is where people get sloppy sometimes. I'm not saying every teacher is a Marxist. I'm saying trust but verify. I'm not saying every classroom is a communist training camp. Maybe LGBTQ, though. Sorry. I'm not saying there's some red flag hidden behind every whiteboard. Yeah, but that's not the argument I'm trying to make anyway. The argument is this. A lot of young people were taught the complaints against capitalism more clearly, more repeatedly, and with more moral urgency than they were taught the cost of communism. And that is a huge problem. Capitalism gets judged by its worst actors. Communism gets judged by its brochure. Think about how this often works. When capitalism is taught, students hear about robber barons, sweatshops, exploitation, inequality, greed, corporations, the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, and business interests corrupting the government. And some of that is actually fair and accurate throughout history. You cannot tell the story of industrial capitalism without its abuses. You cannot talk about markets without talking about cronyism that does in fact crop up. And we're finding cronyism all through our government now. And we're finding all these people that have figured out how to exploit all these government systems that were in place to supposedly try to make things better for the average American. And they've been bilking us, the taxpayers, for hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. But again, these people have been told America is evil, the government is broken. So why not play Robin Hood? I'm just saying. If you want to know why every time we scratch or every time somebody picks up a rock, they find billions of dollars in fraud, it's because they have convinced themselves they are Robin Hood and America is the Sheriff of Nottingham. It's pretty simple when you think about it from that perspective. But then the other problem is communism often gets taught as theory, equity, workers, solidarity, revolution, sharing, anti-colonialism, the oppressed rising up, everyone getting what they need. And then the horrors get treated like footnotes. The gulags, the famine, the secret police, the censorship, the surveillance, the prison camps, the people shot trying to cross the border out of the workers' paradise, the state owning the economy, and eventually every human being attached to that economy. That cannot and never should be a footnote. And why is this so important? Because we have seen, even in our recent history, people that were protesting in places like California holding Mexican flags and talking about how they were coming back to reclaim the lands that were stolen from them, when in reality they weren't stolen. We either bought them or conquered those areas and took them over. That's not stealing. I know it's a painful thing to talk about, but that's not stealing in any definition of the word. But one of those people was a very prominent person who was making the statement that in his mind, communist Russia had things better because things were better within at least eventually they started getting things wrong. But the first decade was pretty cool. 6.5 million people died in that first decade. But again, communist paradise was awesome for the first 10 years. But again, if you keep treating these things as footnotes, and if you teach young people every sin of capitalism and then soften every horror of communism, you can't really be shocked when some of them grow up thinking socialism is just kindness with a budget office attached. The subversive part is not always the label. It is, in fact, the assumptions. You teach young people that wealth is extraction instead of creation. You teach them that profit is exploitation. You teach them that unequal outcomes are proof of oppression. Again, remember, our founding fathers believed that equality was a thing, not equity. All men were created equal. And there was a change made to that declaration. And endowed with rights from our Creator, including those of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's not the original wording. The original wording was pursuit of property. Because one of the key tenets of happiness is actually owning something that belongs to you that nobody can take away from you. And we've gotten way far away from that too, thanks to all these different progressive tax ideas that have crept into America. And that's why I keep telling you, capitalism and socialism cannot coexist in the same space for very long. And we're finding that out the hard way. But again, if you start teaching them that the government is the moral referee of everything, they start to believe you. You teach them that private property is potentially suspicious or even not necessary. You teach them that the successful person probably took something from somebody else. You teach them that personal responsibility is less important than systems, and that's creeping up all over the place. Because I see people every single day that aren't willing to even take personal responsibility for some of the choices that they make in their own lives. Like I know somebody who was complaining the other day to somebody else because they lost something that they desperately had to have, and they needed the person to go find another of the things that they needed, and it took them a while, and they were having a fit. And I was just talking to this person who was venting to me. I'm like, did you bother to tell them that they probably should stop losing things that are that important? Because, sometimes you have to take personal responsibility. But then because people aren't taking personal responsibility, and a lot of times they're leaning into the systems to give them guardrails and safety nets that turn into spider webs and everything else, one day they show up with a political label and everybody says, where did that come from? And why are you suddenly walking around with a hammer and sickle tattoo on your arm? It came from the worldview they were taught. They may not be teaching the Communist Manifesto on Monday morning, but if every lesson teaches that success is theft, profit is exploitation, and unequal outcomes are proof of oppression, you can't act shocked when students start looking for an economic system built around the resentment that they already hold. That is how you teach socialism without ever having to say the word socialism. You teach the assumptions first, then the label shows up later. Now, let's connect this to the institution side. Academia has leaned left for a very, very long time. Teachers' unions have been major democratic political players for a long time. School board races, teacher training, curriculum development, accreditation, campus culture, administrative offices, these things all matter. The left did not have to win every dinner table argument if it already held the teachers, the college, the union endorsement, the campus bureaucracy, and the school board race. Again, not every teacher, not every professor, not every school, but institutionally, the tilt is obvious. And it doesn't really matter the political bent of the teacher if they are required to teach a curriculum that, again, may not use the word socialism, but teaches all the right buzzwords other than that. And then eventually kids go, hey, this sounds a lot like socialism. And according to my teachers, this is pretty cool. So here's where last night's election results help us understand the bigger fight. Look at San Francisco. The race to replace Nancy Pelosi is not really a normal Republican versus Democrat race. It is a fight inside the Democratic coalition. Scott Wiener, yes, I said Wiener, and Connie Chan advanced. One lane is more establishment, the other lane is more labor. Affordability, progressive taxation, working class services. That is the point. In deep blue places, the real fight is often not left versus right anymore. It is left versus lefter. Or left versus far left. Lefter versus my nonprofit has a better grant writer than yours. And that matters because those deep blue places often become laboratories. Get out of my laboratory, Didi. They become proof of concept cities for the ideas that later get sold nationally as compassion, equity, reform, or justice. So when we talk about young people warming to socialism, we cannot just talk about TikTok, although I think that's a pretty good feeder pool. We have to talk about the institutions that formed them as well, because they were around before TikTok. They were taught the complaint, not the cost. And when you combine that with a broken starter economy, that complaint finds a home real fast. All right. So, actually, technically, this was supposed to be the bottom of the hour break, but we're already pretty much back around to the top of the hour. So, I don't know. I guess since it's podcast and not really terrestrial anymore, I don't really have to follow the same time constraints. So I guess we're just going to go ahead and take the break. So when we come back on the other side and talk, we're going to talk about the machinery around the anger, because anger is one thing, organized anger is something else. So again, we're going to take a break. But when we come back, a lot of young people are angry for free, but the machine around them, the training, the messaging, the legal support, the bail funds, the fellowships, the organizing networks, that part has invoices. This is the Rick Robinson Show. We're going to go ahead and take a break. We're going to come back probably and treat this as, we're just going to take a break because this isn't technically top of the hour format, and it doesn't really matter because I keep trying to treat this like I'm still on the radio, and I'm really not. So, I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of an argument with myself. It happens. And according to my grandma, that was when you really knew you were losing it. So it's okay to talk to yourself. It's even okay to answer yourself. It's when you start arguing with yourself, you got a problem. So apparently my name's Rick Robinson and I have a problem, but we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
They tried to quench the fire, drown it all in chains, tried to break our will and wash away our names. But every spark they buried only fed the flame. Now the cry of freedom's roaring through the rain. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change. Every voice united, breaking every chain.
And welcome back into the Chat Lives Matter Day edition of the Rick Robinson Show. The time constraints, the format, they've all gone out the window because I started an hour earlier than I accidentally started an hour earlier than I intended to because we were testing something. And then I had to take an unscheduled break because of a delivery. And now everything's just gone out the damn window. So we're just going to get through the show, and where we land is where we land. So, yes, technically this should be right around top of the hour. It's not going to be. Because we're just now into bottom of hour one material. So there will officially be a top of the hour break here in just a little bit. But like I said, show schedule, show format, they've all gone out the window today. Anyway, I don't know why it bothers me as much as it does, I guess, because I have spent so much time tied to terrestrial clocks and formats and segments that I've always tried to hang on to that. And for some reason, I couldn't really do that today, and I've decided I don't care anymore. But again, so welcome back in. We're working through the question, do young Americans prefer communism over capitalism? And the answer we're building is more nuanced than that, but not really by much, because the fact that any do is kind of scary, because in fact, some do. Too many are flirting with it, but the bigger issue is that young Americans have been taught all of the bad stuff against capitalism and how America sucks and how it's this evil, dark place that was founded on all the wrong ideals and blah, 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 blah. And then they got dropped into an economy that makes those complaints feel real, and then surrounded by institutions that tell them their anger is virtue. But I want to stop right there. So let me put myself a little marker so I know where I was in my notes, so I don't backtrack too much. But I want to stop right there because I want to attack the idea of how bad our economy currently is versus what it used to be, and it's not. Ladies and gentlemen, whether we wish to admit it or not, our poor people, yes, even the ones living under bridges and in tents, live better than 98% of the rest of the world. We are living in such a time of abundance that we now argue over the type of food that we should be eating because there is so much that is available. Some of it good, some of it not so good. We now have people, and I dare say, part of this is borne out through other evidence. Look at what happened when the government got involved with higher education. The cost of everything went up. The fact that so many Americans are on food stamps, even the ones that are in their 50s and 60s and only getting $25 a month, has helped to drive up the cost of food. Anecdotal evidence supporting what I'm saying. Since soda has been removed from food stamps, I have seen a dramatic drop in the price of soda. Not for the big ones like Coke and Dr. Pepper, but all the other ones that were basically price pointing about the same. They're not. I mean, I was able to buy a 12-pack the other day of A&W root beer for $5. I don't remember the last time I was able to do that. And it's been so rare around here that Gracie came back home after school and saw that there was a 12-pack of root beer on the table. And she says, "Papa, we have soda in the house?" Yeah, she's 6. Even she realizes that we don't have soda that often. But again, part of the very things that we've put in place to try to make sure that everybody remains safe and well-fed are creating some of the very issues that we're talking about. But again, whether you like it or not, we are living in one of the most abundant times ever in this country. But we've also ourselves, because we put everything on autopilot and expect that our politicians to have our best interests at heart and actually do the things that we sent them to DC to do, we have created some of this very same mess. Okay, so I'm insane. You want to try to elaborate? So, while I wait for the trolls to catch up, now let's get into the machinery, and I want to put the guardrail up right away. There is a difference between paying protesters and funding protest infrastructure. We should not blur that line, but we also should not pretend the infrastructure itself does not exist. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every 19-year-old with a cardboard sign is on somebody's payroll. Usually the ones with the homemade cardboard signs, not so much. The other ones, probably. But that idea is lazy on its face, and a lot of them are angry for free. But the machinery around them, the training, the messaging, the legal support, the bail funds, the donor networks, the professional organizers, the fellowships, the nonprofit infrastructure, the communications shops, the social media machine, that part, that's where the evidence lies. That's where the receipts are. That is where the modern activist ecosystem gets interesting. The machine does not have to create the anger because the anger is already there. People feeling like they can't afford rent did that. Debt did that. Falling into the trap of you have to go to college to get a good job did that. Going into corporate structure and realizing that in a lot of cases in corporate structure, you can't get past a certain level without a 4-year degree did that. There are now ads I see all the time talking about this new thing called the paper ceiling, because there are lots of folks who never got a 4-year degree, but they've done a lot of different things. And if their actual work experience was being considered instead of the degree, they would be overqualified for the positions that they would be applying for. However, because they don't have that degree, they're not eligible. And again, when the education structure, when the government structure, when all these things funnel you into this higher education funnel, and the government is involved in helping to offset the cost, just like with everything else, the people that are in charge of the cost go, hey, we've latched onto the government teat now, we can charge whatever we want. And now colleges basically become grades 13, 14, 15, and 16. Instead of the higher education that it used to be. So again, the anger is already there, and we've discussed why. The feeling that the American dream now has a cover charge is feeding that. The machine just shows up with a megaphone, a slogan, a lawyer, a bail fund, a training manual, and a donor-funded nonprofit logo at the bottom of the page. That is how grievance becomes organized power, and this is where DSA and DSA-style groups matter. Not because DSA controls the whole Democratic Party, because it doesn't. But it doesn't have to control the whole party to move it. It only has to control enough primaries, enough local offices, enough activist pressure points, enough staff pipelines, enough school board fights, enough city council seats, enough nonprofit partnerships, and enough media language to drag the party's center of gravity left. And it's working. Just look at what's happening in New York City right now. Power is not just the White House. That's the power everybody talks about. It's also not even the most important power source. The PowerPoints are actually the school board. Nobody pays attention to those elections. Power is the prosecutor race. Nobody really talks about those either. Power is the city council seat that writes the rules everyone else has to live under. Power is the staffer who writes the memo. Power is the activist group that decides which words are acceptable, which in America is laughable. Power is the union endorsement. Power is the nonprofit grant, which we're now finding is being abused all over the place. Power is the low turnout primary where 8% of voters decided what 100% of the residents have to live with. And last night's election results give us a live snapshot of this. DSA's own publication said it had 21 endorsed candidates on the June 2nd ballot, not counting 2 uncontested New Mexico Democratic primary candidates. Several DSA-backed candidates either won, secured ballot spots, led, or moved towards runoffs. That's not a socialist sweep, but it's also not nothing. In America, the fact that the Democratic Socialists of America are gaining a foothold in our political system should terrify everyone who believes that freedom is the right choice. That's the red line. It's not that they've taken over, it's that they've gained a foothold. The socialist lane did not take over the whole map last night, but it did not disappear either. It showed up organized, branded, disciplined, and capable of advancing candidates where the terrain is favorable. That is how movements work. They don't always win the big office first. They build backbenches. They dig trenches where they can basically stay put. They take local seats. They get school board members. They get city council members. They get prosecutors. They get staff. They get committees. They get policy shops. They get nonprofits. And after all of that, they start to get influence. Then one day, people look around and say, when and how exactly did the Democratic Socialist of Americas become normal? It became normal because nobody treated the pipeline seriously while it was being built. Now, to be fair, again, the election results complicate the story. In Los Angeles, Nithya Top Raman, described as a Democratic Socialist who was not leading the mayoral race. Karen Bass was ahead. Spencer Pratt was in the second lane. And Top Raman was sitting third in the partial results that we currently have. Bass is already confirmed to be headed to a runoff, but this was not a clean socialist takeover of Los Angeles, at least not yet. Because remember, we won't know the results of the election in commie failure for about a week. I have a sneaking suspicion that Spencer is going to be knocked out. I wish I was wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm going to be. But as everything is currently framed, that still matters, because our point today, and my point today, is not that the far left swept the board, because it didn't. My point is that the far left remains organized and influential inside a democratic coalition that is fighting itself in public, which is new. It's rare. We've never seen public infighting with the Democratic Party before, and that's how I know how much more of a behind the scenes, below the surface of what you can see problem this is. Because if the DSA is now willing to openly pick a fight inside the Democratic Party and do it publicly, they either are a lot stronger than anybody thinks, or they believe they are. And either way, that becomes a very dangerous thing. In some places, establishment Democrats still have the machine, which isn't much better. In some places, progressive candidates have the energy. In some places, voters are so frustrated with governance that an outsider can become a real problem for an incumbent. In some places, the socialist lane advances, in other places it stalls, but the pipeline itself is still running, and that is the big picture that we're talking about today. The kids were taught that America sucks. The current framing of the economy gave that complaint emotional weight. The activist machine organized the anger, and then city policy started showing voters what the theory looks like when it hits the sidewalk. And that's where we're going next. No bail, no brakes. So let's talk about consequences and how often so many of these things wouldn't have been able to take a foothold if there were, in fact, still consequences. Because one of the most dangerous things a society can do is teach young people that anger is virtue, and then remove the consequences when anger becomes disorder. Again, I'm going to add a guardrail. I'm not saying every bail reform is evil. I actually used to be on the side of justice reform. You can find my archives when I used to do shows on places like KOKC here in Oklahoma City and WNJC out of New Jersey. But then it got hijacked. I firmly believe we need to use our justice system to lock up the people that we're actually afraid of, who have done very bad, very terrible things, not just the people that we're angry at. And I have been saying that from the beginning. But then the idea of bail reform got hijacked by far left people who think that anybody going to jail for any reason at any time is just wrong and cruel. So again, I'm also not saying that poor people should just sit in jail just because they can't afford bond. That's not justice either. But there is a way to find a middle ground, and the folks that are in charge of a lot of these no bail jurisdictions don't want to find it, or don't know how, or don't care enough to find it. Because look, if you're Joe Schmo who's jacked a pack of cigarettes, no, you shouldn't have to sit in jail while you try to scrape up bond. That's dumb. But if you're somebody who's done very terrible things to people and justice has become a revolving door, then all you're doing is giving them the opportunity to do even more bad things to people. There's a real difference between a low-risk first-time defendant and a repeat offender with open cases, violent history, and a calendar full of court dates. The problem is when reform stops making that distinction. The problem is when the system cannot tell the difference between a guy who made one bad decision and a guy who treats release like it's a halftime break. The problem is when consequences disappear and everybody is supposed to pretend that is compassion. Remember, under Barack Obama, we watched a city burn pretty much every month for the last 4 years of his presidency. There were no consequences faced. Everybody said, they're just venting their frustration, Rick. We need to let them do that. Okay. When does my side get a turn? Because I guarantee you I would have been thrown in jail. Because I'm just as frustrated, maybe for different reasons, but I am just as frustrated. So when you build a revolving door and call it justice, do not act shocked when people actually start walking through it. And this ties directly into the worldview we have been talking about. If your worldview says crime is mostly society's fault, cops are mostly the problem, consequences are mostly oppression, and disorder is just desperation with better signage, then soft on crime policy becomes morally attractive. But voters do not live inside the theory. They live on the street. They see the open air drug market. They see the tent city. They see the store closing. They see the security guard who cannot stop anyone. Because again, security's main job is to observe and report. And according to the Supreme Court, that's now basically the job of most police departments. Nobody talks about that part anymore either. They see the repeat offender arrested for, let's say, the 14th time. They see the business owner told to just file another report, and then the police do nothing with it. They see the police officer completely demoralized. They see the family that no longer goes downtown because they're afraid for their safety. And at some point, voters stop asking whether the theory sounded compassionate and start asking whether that city ideal still works. And that becomes yet another problem. And this leads us to one of the next things that I want to talk about. It'll take me a second to get it pulled up, so bear with me. I think it was this one. Nope, that's not it. I was wrong. Did I not download that one? I bet I didn't download that one. Although I do normally have the title card up and then my picture is smaller for those of you that, realize that I have a face made for radio and a voice made for print. So, but let me do something real quick because I just realized I did not grab that graphic, I don't think. Okay, you are making me scroll through all the small stuff way too much. Talk amongst yourselves and you trolls can keep screaming at me while I'm grabbing this graphic. It's okay. I don't really care. Dude, I made that graphic really early in this and can't remember where I parked it. Wait, I think that's it. Yep. Nope. Close. There we go. That's the one I'm looking for. I'll just download it again since I lost it. All right, so now let's get it on the screen. Sorry. I'm my own producer, and sometimes things go sideways. It happens. All right, so let me try to change this up some, or maybe, no, I don't really like how that looks either. Nope, that ain't going to work. Okay, so let's just get rid of this for a second so you guys can actually see everything. All right. So the graphic itself is actually quite simple. Who owns the revolving door? And that's the part that we're talking about right now, because it's funny how when you really stop and look at it, a lot of these things all get tied together. So who owns the revolving door when it comes to criminal justice reform? And this is information regarding party control, where soft on crime and bail reform policies show up most. In the top 100 city mayors, 67% of them are Democrats, 22% Republican, and 11% other. Top 30 city mayors, 90% Democrat, 7% Republican, and 3% independent. Ones with the 3-state trifectas, that changes things up a little bit. 32% Democrat, 46% Republican, and 22% split. Broad bail reform jurisdictions, 60% of Democrats run those areas, 10% Republican and 30% split. In the 5 strict cashless, near cashless bail core, and number 5 in strict cashless, near cashless bail core ideas, 100% Democratic run. This includes places like Illinois, New Jersey, New Mexico, and Washington, D.C. So the very same people that hate the cops, that wanted the cops eliminated, but now because ICE has become the new bad guy, keep saying, well, we prefer local cops to these federal stormtrooper Gestapo types. Yeah, they wanted them gone too, which is interesting because years ago when they kept saying, you don't need a gun because that's what the police are for. Then I kept saying, why do places get fined for not having fire extinguishers in them then? Because that's what the fire department is for. And they never really had an answer for that. Now, think about how much worse this would have been if we as a society had bought into the idea that only cops need guns, and then just 5-6 years later, they started the process to try to defund and remove police. Now, a lot of them have started moving away from that idea, but it's only because they got a foothold in other places. It doesn't really matter what the cops do anymore, because if the DA won't press charges, or if the DA just says, yeah, here's a desk ticket, hopefully you come back and go on about your day, then it doesn't really matter what the cops do anymore, which is why most people that are cops don't do as much anymore, because it doesn't do them any good. But yeah, so I know I'm probably getting a lot of hate in the chat today. I don't care. Because again, these are data points. This isn't me talking just to talk. This is me connecting data point dots and showing you how broken everything is and telling you why it's as broken as it is. So I don't really care what your opinions are. Because trust me, I had to jump through hoops to even get this put together. Because every tool that I was trying to use kept saying that it wouldn't write it because of political bias, and I kept having to explain to each tool, and it took several to get this put together, that I was pulling the analytical data to show a pattern, not trying to prove bias, because I don't care about the bias. The bias is already there if you're willing to look at it. So it doesn't matter how insane you think I am. It doesn't matter how much you think I'm talking out my ass, because I have done the research. Again, strict cashless, near cashless, Bailcore, 100% Democrat-run areas. The same party that is now being infiltrated by the Democratic Socialists of America, who have a foothold. Socialism and communism are antithetical to one another, just like Christianity and Islam are. And I'm going to piss a lot of people off with what I'm about to say. Islam is not a religion. It is a theocracy wrapped in a religious cloak. And that is a huge difference. Huge difference. These things cannot coexist in the same space at the same time for very long. And sadly, the left, because now it's completely lost the plot. Obama cleaned the bench out. Nobody knew what to do. They've rigged their primaries now multiple times. You keep telling me there's no way they can rig the election, but they keep rigging their primaries and have done so now 3 times. Just saying. So if they can rig their primaries, it's not that much harder to put some fingers on scales in places where you already have control. And again, as unpopular as this opinion is, somebody needs to tell me where 11 million voters went between 2020 and 2024. Was there a rapture and I missed it? Were Biden voters the ones that got raptured and nobody told us? Where'd they go? Because remember, literally Hitler was still on the ballot. But sure, let's call me dumb and stupid and insane instead of looking at actual data. I'm okay with that. I don't really care. So at the city level, again, Democrats dominate as of June 2026, 67 of the 100 largest U.S. cities. They had Democratic-affiliated mayors. Republicans had 22%. The rest were libertarian, independent, nonpartisan, or unknown. At the state level, the picture is more mixed. Republicans have more state trifectas nationally than Democrats. So I'm going to have to be precise. We're talking about the whole country. And when we do that, the map is not simply blue. But if we're talking about big city governance, the places where Americans most often see homelessness, transit disorder, progressive prosecution, no bail experiments, anti-police politics, school fights, and activist urban policy, then the Democratic footprint itself is very strong. And again, the data that I just showed you supports that. So if you don't like it, suck it. So when people ask who owns the revolving door, the answer is not every Democrat and no Republican, because that's too easy and too sloppy. But if we're talking about, again, the biggest cities, the soft on crime prosecutors, the cashless bail experiments, and the places where disorder became a lifestyle brand, the scoreboard is not exactly hard to read, and Los Angeles gave us a live example last night. Karen Bass, who is probably one of the most unpopular mayors in history, advanced last night. Not as the conquering hero the way the Democrats expected, though. She is officially headed to a runoff after failing to clear the threshold because she didn't hit 51%. She was under pressure over homelessness, public safety, wildfire responses, city competence, all of it. Spencer Pratt, of all people, became part of the backlash lane. Top Ramen represented the Democratic Socialist Progressive lane, and I still am willing to bet you dollars to donuts that in 7 days, she'll get the nod for the primary, not him, because mail-in ballots. That is the Democratic coalition fight in miniature. The incumbent establishment, the frustrated outsider lane, the socialist progressive lane, and voters asking why the city still feels broken. In Los Angeles, Karen Bass did not get a coronation. She got slapped with a warning label. That's the key. When homelessness, crime, fire responses, affordability, and basic competence become the ballot question, ideology has to answer to the streets. And that is where the no bail and no consequences angle fits. You can organize anger. You can excuse disorder. You can call consequences oppression. You can say the system made them do it. But eventually, the public asks a very old-fashioned question. Can I live here safely? And the resounding answer so far has been a lot of folks from California voting with their feet and moving away. Because to them, the answer has been no. That means the theory failed. So hour one, and I know we're a bit off schedule, gives us the chain. Bad education creates bad worldview. Bad economics, or the illusion of bad economics, creates anger. Activist machinery organizes the anger. No consequence policy lets the fire spread. But we do still have hour two coming up, even though we're a bit off schedule. So coming up in hour two, we're going to put the whole pipeline together, from faculty lounge to City Hall. And then we are going to look at what last night's elections actually proved and what they didn't prove. Because if conservatives think the answer is just yelling Marxist, and a lot of folks on my side seem to think so, at young people, we're going to lose the fight, and it should be a fight that we're able to win. So when we come back from faculty lounge to City Hall, the pipeline did not build itself, and the election results tell us the far left did not sweep, but it did gain a bit more of a foothold. This is the Rick Robinson Show. This is the end of officially hour one, even though we're a bit off topic or off schedule, not off topic. But we're going to get through the whole damn thing anyway. Again, my name's Rick. This is my show. We'll be back. Hour one is officially in the books, or the first almost 90 minutes officially in the books. The rest coming at you on the other side.
I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage. But the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. no place.
No room for hate.
Oh, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
You can wave a flag above it. You can quote a verse or two. You can dress it up like justice. Tell it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate. Oh, in America tonight, no room in the home. Oh, where the children need the light, no room in the heart. Oh, where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart, oh, where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start.
Oh,
Where the anger breaks.
where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up.
Oh,
Where the hurt gives way.
no room for hate.
No room for hate.
No, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
Not in Jesus' name. Oh, not in this house. Not in this heart. Not in His name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight, entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST, the future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the number one way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
All right, welcome back into the program, ladies and gentlemen. I don't do this often, but I kept waiting for what looks like Brian to spout off about the party switch fallacy. So apparently he says I didn't have a problem with white supremacists getting a chokehold on the Republican Party. That didn't bother you very much. Objection. Facts not in evidence. Your side still hates Jews. Your side is currently running a Nazi. Your side is the one that has always tried to allow people who aren't legally allowed to vote to influence the population size to control how much power you have in the House. So, anybody remember that, Democrat guy named Byrd? He was a grand leader of the KKK, grand wizard. What isn't that what they called it? Yeah. So again, objection. Facts not in evidence, and if you come back with party switch, I will own you, because it never happened. So also, why don't you focus on the massive corruption being committed by the Republicans and MAGA and our executive branch? First of all, it's our O-U-R. So how about that? How about massive corruption in my face? What corruption exactly? Where is it? Show me the receipts. Because there isn't any. As a matter of fact, private citizen Donald Trump just won a lawsuit that happened to be settled while he was president and tried to leave $10 million still on the table and instead create a fund for people that were also being unfairly targeted by the government, which he currently runs, by the way. So the idea that this was going to be partisan is just asinine. Anyway, so I've talked through a lot of the bumper, and we got to get back to the show. But I know I say never feed the trolls, but this one deserves some attention. Now he's going back into the realm or the realm of irrelevancy.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody?
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Otherwise known as Chat Lives Matter Day, right here live on KLRnradio.com. Since I haven't talked about it much yet, tonight things are going to be a little bit different. So this is the off week for Inquiry, because they're an every other week show. Normally that's when I do Kingdom and Country Bible Study. G is also going to be off for his summer rotation schedule, so I will be taking control of the 8 o'clock hour until sometime in August. And so for tonight, I haven't decided if I'm going to do a 2-hour Kingdom and Country edition or Kingdom and Country and then roll into America Off the Rails. And I may actually just do the extended Bible study edition and then save the America Off the Rails takeover for next week. That way it's not so weird with it being my voice in 2 completely branded shows back to back. So I think that's probably what I'm going to do. So that starts tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Again, probably Kingdom and Country extended Bible study edition, followed by Behind the Enemy Lines, our good friends Gene and Ross. Hopefully the Amish one has recovered from his pole dancing, working from the California elections last night. So anyway. Yeah, again, objection, facts not in evidence, because Yeah, reasons. Need we mention Anthony Weiner? Whose side was he on again? Just questions. You guys like to point to things that don't add up. None of us are trying to protect pedophiles. We're trying to protect the victims of the pedophiles. You guys don't seem to care about any of that. Because a lot of us still want the answers, but we don't want a dump that actually puts the women who were supposedly victims of this stuff back into the spotlight again. But here's my other question for all of that. Remember when the hashtag Me Too, or as the Gen X in me likes to call it, the Pound Me Too movement started, and everything started coming out from the woodworks about all the bad things Hollywood folks had ever done? Where's that for this? Because normally once a dam starts to break, information starts flowing forth uncontrollably no matter what. And it's not happening. I wonder why that is. Because remember, they wouldn't even know who Epstein was if not for the help of Donald Trump. You really think the guy would have handed somebody over to him that had incriminating evidence on him? Y'all aren't very bright. All right, anyway, back to the notes. I have fed the trolls enough. So, hour 2 reset. If you're just joining us, we're not arguing that every young American is a communist. We're asking why socialism sounds normal to so many of them now. Hour 1 gave us the chain, polling, education, activist infrastructure, and city policy all reinforcing everything they have been told is true. Hour 2 is where we're going to connect the pipeline and ask what last night's elections actually tell us, because last night did not prove a socialist takeover, but it might have. We just don't have all the data yet. But it also absolutely did not prove the socialist lane is dead. So welcome back. This is hour 2 of the Rick Robinson Show. We're working through today's premise: the kids are not all right. Communism, capitalism, and the generation that can't afford the dream, or has been told to believe been led to believe they can't anyway. In hour 1, we built the pieces. Now let's assemble the machine. And what I see here is not one giant secret command center. It's not a cartoon conspiracy with a guy in the basement petting a cat and moving pins around a map. It's an ecosystem. And ecosystems can be more powerful than conspiracies because nobody has to give one order. The incentives all point. Yeah, good point. Joe Biden wasn't a Republican, Brian. Good point. And ecosystems can be more powerful than conspiracies because nobody has to give one order. The incentives all point the same direction. Here's the pipeline. It starts with the classroom. The unions start the process to shape the classroom. They decide what curriculum gets taught. They decide who ideologically gets to teach. And if you don't believe me that there's been a broad shift in the wrong direction, just look at the number of faculty members inside public schools and higher education facilities that identify as conservative, because they are outnumbered about 9-1. Then we have the non-governmental organizations. Then City Hall. That's the path. The classroom shapes the worldview. The union protects and funds the ecosystem that shapes that worldview. The NGO organizes the anger that is fed and shaped because of that worldview. Primary elections are most often used to reward the activist class, and City Hall turns the theory into policy. That is how you get from faculty lounge language to street-level consequences. You do not need a secret command center when you have all of that. The worldview comes from a classroom. The money comes from the unions and the non-governmental organizations. The candidates come through low turnout primaries, and the consequences show up on the sidewalk. First, academia shapes the worldview. Again, not every professor, not every teacher, not every classroom, but the institutional tilt is real. Universities, teachers, colleges, administrative offices, curriculum writers, campus activist groups, DEI bureaucracies, and professional education institutions have leaned left for a very long time. And that matters because young people do not learn just facts in school anymore. They learn moral categories. Who is the villain? Who's the victim? What counts as justice? What does justice even mean anymore? What counts as oppression? What counts as freedom? What counts as fairness? If you spend years teaching students that capitalism is exploitation, property is privilege, police are oppression, unequal outcomes are injustice, and government is or injustice, sorry, and government is the fixer of everything, then do not be surprised when they suddenly grow up and vote like they believe all of these things. Second, teachers' union and educational institutions protect that very ecosystem that they are responsible for creating. Teachers' unions are not just collective bargaining groups. They are political machines. They endorse, they fund, they lobby, they influence school board races, they shape democratic policies. They are part of the pipeline. Going back to, I believe it was Brian again, who thought it was laughable when I pointed out that, city councils and school boards have a lot more control than anybody wants to admit. When you talk about the indoctrination of children versus the removal of consequences, that is very true. I'm going to say this again. National politics is sexy. National politics is where the money gets made. But the actual changes happen at the ground level in your local area, whether anybody wants to admit it or not. Because again, all of these things that we're talking about as far as this ecosystem influence school board races. They shape democratic policies. They are and always have been a part of the pipeline. And again, I'm not attacking the individual teacher who's doing their best with an average of 28 kids, a broken copier, and the superintendent who thinks another consultant will fix reading scores. I'm talking about institutional power. When the people writing the lesson plans, training the teachers, funding the school board races, and lobbying the legislature all lean the same direction, you do not need a conspiracy because you already have an ecosystem. Third up in the totem pole is NGOs and activist networks. Those are used to organize the anger. They take the worldview, they take the anger that a lot of these kids are feeling, especially as they start transitioning from high school into the university system and not really knowing what to do with themselves and not sure what degree to get because, things that are important aren't really taught anymore. They provide all of the things that they need, including the slogans, the signs. They provide the training. They provide the legal support. They provide the campaign staff. They provide the communications. They provide the pressure. They provide the bail funds, if bail is even necessary anymore. And they also provide access to donor networks. That is how college grievances become street activism. That is how street activism becomes local policy. That is how local policy becomes a national talking point. Fourth, Democratic primaries often reward the activist class. This is especially true in deep blue places where the Democratic primary is the real election. If the district is 80% blue, then the fight is not really in November. The fight is the primary, and low turnout primaries reward organized, ideological, motivated voters. That means activist groups can punch way above their weight most of the time because most of America is turned off by today's political climate. That is how a small but disciplined faction can move the needle within a whole party. The DSA does not have to represent the median Democrat. It just has to be better organized in the places where the median Democrat stopped paying attention. Fifth point, big city governments become laboratories. Get out of my laboratory, Didi. This is where the theory becomes policy. Bail reform, progressive prosecution, anti-police rhetoric, homelessness policy, or shall we say unhoused policy. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. DEI bureaucracy, school discipline changes, housing regulation, tax experiments, anti-business sentiment, because let's face it, business owners are the bad guys. The moral vocabulary of the campus becomes the governing language of City Hall, and then voters experience it, not as a theory, but as traffic, as crime, as closed stores, as tent cities, as not being able to use the park next door to you or down the street from you because it's been overrun by homeless drug addicts and there's fecal matter and used needles everywhere you can behold with your eyes. As schools that do not teach, as police who have been told to stand down, as businesses leaving, as families moving out, as those businesses leave, that is the pipeline. Academia shapes the worldview. Unions protect and fund the ecosystem established to that worldview. NGOs organize the anger. Primary elections reward the activists who are alert enough and active enough to actually show up and vote. And cities become the laboratories, for all of these progressive ideologies. You do not need a secret command center when you have all of that. And I know I'm saying that a lot, but I'm trying to move this from the realm of conspiracy theory to help you understand that you can do the same research that I have just done. You can find these same things for yourself. They exist. They are there. The worldview, again, comes from the classroom. The money comes from the unions and the NGOs. The candidates come through low turnout primaries. The consequences show up on the sidewalk. And the reason we went back over that again is it's time to fold elections back in. California did not give us one simple story last night, but we won't actually know the whole story for a week. So it might be simpler than anybody wants to think. In the governor's race, the pure progressive billionaire lane did not dominate. Tom Steyer, who was trailing Steve Hilton and Xavier Becerra, who were leading. In Los Angeles, Karen Bass survived but did not glide. She is headed to a runoff with frustration over homelessness, public safety, wildfires, and city competence all hanging over the race and around her neck like an albatross. Now, again, what makes me concerned, and if I'm wrong, I will come back and we'll talk about it in about a week. But what makes me concerned is I'm afraid we're going to see what we always see. Those two Republicans outperformed expectations, but they did not perform well enough to stop the steal. And now I'm curious to see how many mail-in ballots are going to come in and flip the scale, because it's what always happens. In San Francisco, the Pelosi replacement race became a Democrat-on-Democrat fight over what kind of left gets the seat. And DSA-backed candidates showed that their machine is still alive, not all powerful, not sweeping the board, but alive, organized, and capable of winning or advancing in favorable terrain, meaning they have a foothold in America. Socialism has a foothold in America. And as we've talked about quite often on this show, socialism is the gateway drug to capitalism. Eventually, one leads to the other. You can't get to one without going through the other, because it's like traveling a map. You can't really, even if you fly to get there, you still have to traverse the map. So there's all kinds of territory that you're covering. So with economic systems, it's much the same. You start with capitalism or communism on one side, and then there are varying degrees that get you from one side of the scale to the other. And you can't really get to communism without toying with socialism first, which is why this should terrify everyone, but it won't. But that's the story. The Democratic Party is not one thing in these cities anymore. It is a coalition. And there's a lot of infighting happening within that coalition. Establishment Democrats want control. Democratic Socialists want the steering wheel. Progressive nonprofits want to control the rule book. Unions want the contracts, and activists want the language. And regular voters just want the tent city moved, the rent lowered, the streets safe, and the fire department funded. And that's where this whole show starts to come together. The kids are not all right because the institutions that raised them were not neutral. And sadly, as we discovered with COVID, a lot of the parents weren't plugged in enough to know exactly what was broken with those institutions. And so the schoolwork had to come home. And then suddenly parents were like, holy crap, what are you teaching my kids? So I want to say this because, again, insert Gemini joke here, but I'm of two minds of all of this stuff. Because in one form, what happened with COVID was terrible. What we've uncovered that happened with COVID, with the involvement of mid-level bureaucrats and folks like Tony Fauci, is terrifying. But at the same time, it woke a lot of people up. So while this foothold has been here, and while the DSA is now aggressively trying to advance because they have been uncovered and they can't do so under the cloak of darkness anymore, there are a lot of parents who are starting to make changes in what and how their children are taught. This, unfortunately, is going to take a generation or two if we do make the proper changes to start catching back up again. And what drove me down this rabbit hole was realizing how unpopular the idea of America's 250th birthday is, depending on your party leanings, which is insane to me. Every Republican on the planet celebrated in America, celebrated the bicentennial, even though they weren't really fond of the guy who was in charge at the time. And there was lots of things that were blowing back from scandals, etc. Dude, Watergate makes everything we're going through today look like it was a tea party. That's the scary thing. That's the scary thing. But again, kids are not all right because the institutions that raised them, notice I said the institutions, not their parents, weren't neutral. The economy they entered wasn't healthy, which is a weird take on it, really, when you think about it, because again, we are the top 1% of the world, whether anybody wants to admit it or not. And that's why I keep trying to tell everybody, every time the Democrats talk about how this is only going to affect the top 1%, you got to remember they are a bunch of folks who want a one world government. So they're not just talking about the top 1% of America. And if you don't believe me, just look at what Joe Biden did when he decided, hey, if you use Venmo or PayPal or something to sell something that's more than $600, we're going to have a record of that and we're going to tax you for it. Does that sound like a top 1% kind of thing to do? Unless or until you look at it in that framework. Again, just saying. So the activist machinery around them was not asleep, and the cities run by these theories have not delivered enough basic competence. This leads me to another side point. When I first started trying to use AI to help me build show notes and help me keep myself on track because ADHD squirrel, I got into an argument with both forms of the AI that I commonly have to use to put these things together, because sometimes one is better at one part and the other is better at the other. But in order to break them of a very bad habit, I had to teach them something, which is, if the Democrats have all the answers, why is Washington, D.C. one of the worst places in the country since as long as it's had a city government, they've been in charge? And it broke both AIs because they couldn't reconcile it. Because even the people that are programming them, and even though they're not telling them exactly what to think, they're giving them the social guardrails and everything else, and the conflict resolution guardrails and the social compliance guardrails. And when you point out that, hey, if everything for the Democrats work out the way it's supposed to all the time, and they are the panacea to fix everything, why is everything they touch broken? And I started with DC because it was the cleanest example, because it didn't have a city government for a long time. But from the moment it had one, pretty much Democrats have been in control of all of it. And yet, even though they kept promising all these things and promising all these things and promising all these things, and had full control, city council, mayorship, police department, all of it, none of it ever materialized. So it confused the hell out of the AIs. And even this today was a hard show to put together, because every time it got confronted by data points and data sets that didn't match its ideology, it kept telling me, both of them, that they couldn't build the show outline for me, but never would tell me why. So here's the point that I'm trying to make. Because even though it's fun, this doesn't mean the right just gets to sit back and point and laugh. It means we on the right had better get serious, because we've had this weird idea, and I talked about this in the opening of the show. We have had this weird big brother, little brother complex when it comes to politics, because the Democratic Party was around first. We have always come back to them and treated them as if they are the older brother. This happened even under Reagan. Reagan, who wanted to take them at face value when they said, wipe the slate clean and then we'll fix the system because the immigration system is broken. Okay. Reagan wiped the slate clean. Now, keep in mind, when this happened, I was, that was 86. So I was 13. So I had no idea. But the funny thing is, listening to people that were older than me were like, yeah, we kept watching what he was doing, saying, yeah, this is a terrible idea. And now we're seeing the same thing when it comes to Trump with Iran. So I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen with that either, but that's not the topic for today. So, yeah, but either way. So here's the thing. We better get serious, because we keep not only believing that we're big brother, little brother living in the same happy household, but we also keep thinking that we get to play by these Marquis of Queensberry rules, and it doesn't matter if we lose, as long as we lose with honor, and we're getting our lunches eaten over and over and over again, because we keep not wanting to see what's plainly in front of our faces. The Democrats have stacked the deck as much as they can in blue cities and blue states. And then they want to cry foul when we start trying to do the same thing, because it's the only way that we can fight back. We didn't create this. They did. But they liked it because it took us forever to figure out what they did. And they were able to make California this blue paradise as we all sit and wait for it not to actually fall off the shelf into the sea, as they kept telling us it would happen with climate change and global warming and all the other things that came before those, but falling off the fiscal shelf into the sea because it can't sustain itself anymore. So this is what last night actually proved. So we're going to slow down a bit and be fair, because this is where analysis matters. Last night did not prove America is turning socialist overnight, because it isn't. It didn't prove the DSA controls the Democratic Party, but again, it doesn't really have to. It didn't prove that every Democrat is in fact a communist. Didn't prove it, but sometimes you have to wonder. It did not prove every protester is paid and that every protest is paid for. And it did not prove every bail reform caused every crime problem, because those problems existed before the bail reform. So they've only exacerbated them, and that much is true. If we say that, we make the argument easier to dismiss. What last night did prove is more useful. It proved the far left lane is actually very organized, and a lot more organized than a lot of us on the right wanted to admit. It proved socialist and DSA-backed candidates can win or advance in deep blue territories. It proved establishment Democrats do still have power, but that power might be waning. It proved deep blue cities are having internal fights among their left wings. It proved voters are starting to judge theory by results. And it proved the Democratic coalition is wrestling in public over affordability, public safety, homelessness, policing, taxation, capitalism, and whether it's a good thing, and overall government competence. And that is enough. You do not need to exaggerate when the real picture is already this interesting. Let's take another look at Los Angeles. Bass was the incumbent. She had the office. She had the name. She had the establishment lane. But she still ended up in a runoff environment because voters have eyes. They have watched homelessness. They have watched emergency response controversies. They have watched public safety debates. They have watched affordability go sideways. They have watched her make excuses for being overseas at a party while her city burned. And then they watched her make the argument that these are 30-year-old problems and I can't fix them overnight, while she and the rest of her ilk were thumbing their nose at Donald Trump for not being able to fix the entire American problem on day one. And I will admit that was a self-inflicted wound from Donald Trump, because he kept saying, I will be able to make things better on day one. He was being hyperbolic, but you can't give Aspies hyperbole because they're going to take you literally. Just saying. So then you have Spencer Pratt. Now, whether you like him or not, that's not the point. The point is that an outsider frustration lane became real enough to matter, because this is the guy who kept driving home the point, and he did so very succinctly. He stayed in 3 points: homelessness, crime, and the dangerousness of the city were pretty much the only things that he really talked about. Well, actually, I guess homelessness, crime, and dangerousness kind of go together. And then, of course, poor fire responses. And then, but when somebody else, granted, remember, it wasn't even him, when somebody else put together a video showing that he was living in a trailer and put it out to the public, of course, there was an outcry, because by then he was actually staying in a hotel. And he's like, well, that still proves I don't have a house anymore, assholes. But yeah, so that's why Spencer Pratt was able to get traction. My concern is I don't think it was going to be enough traction for him to be able to outperform what I'm afraid happens next. He would have had to get to 51%. Because in a jungle primary, if you can capture 51% of the vote, there is no other election. That's it. Bingo, you're done. Now, the bright spot here is the incumbent mayor wasn't able to do that yet either. I say yet because we won't really know for 7 more days. But then you have Nithya Top Raman, the Democratic Socialist Progressive lane, saying, no, the answer is not a move to the center. The answer is further structural change. That's the fight in a lot of blue cities and blue states. And again, I would not be surprised if she manages to, if they can't make Bass win outright with the mail-in vote, they're gonna put her over the top of Spencer. They're gonna put her over the top of Pratt. I'm almost certain. I am 99.9% sure. But I guess we'll find out. And if I'm wrong, I guess I'll be eating crow in about a week. This takes us to San Francisco. The Pelosi seat race tells the same story from another angle. Deep blue district, Democratic fight, establishment lane, progressive labor lane, big money, anti-billionaire messaging, affordability, taxation, and services. Again, not Republican versus Democrat. It's a fight over which version of the left inherits the machine that Nancy Pelosi helped to build. And then DSA's candidate list tells us the pipeline is not imaginary. It is documented, it is public, and it is well organized. The DSA's own people are telling you the strategy. Endorse, organize, train, win local races first, build power from there, which is the mistake the libertarians have made. As a little L libertarian, I'm kind of happy they've made it. They kept shooting for the big seat first, and they weren't ever able to get off the ground. The DSA has been more methodical. They have moved slowly. A lot like the idea of the progressive tax code, which got re-implemented 40, 50 years after it was removed because the Democrats kept coming back to the well until the Republicans finally said again, hey, we don't really believe the American people are going to be so stupid to let you tip them over upside down and shake their pockets, so we'll let them decide. DSA has had much the same strategy. They have slowly, methodically taken up room within the Democratic Party, and now they have gotten so much more power that they don't even feel like they have to hide it anymore. So the honest headline from last night is this: the socialist lane didn't sweep, but the pipeline is still producing candidates, and the socialist wing of the left actually has a rather strong foothold. That's the middle ground, and that's the scariest part when we're using that as what would be considered the middle ground, because that's actually a lot stronger than any hype that I could have come up with. If you came into last night looking for a socialist sweep, you didn't exactly get it. If you came in for looking for to prove that the socialist lane is dead, you didn't get that either. What you got was a live X-ray of the Democratic Party's bones and a better autopsy than the DNC did. And some of those bones are starting to point in very different directions. This is why today's show matters, because the polling says young people are open to socialism. The education pipeline explains why that language to them now sounds normal. The activist infrastructure explains how anger becomes organized. Hi, Chipotle, how you doing? The city governance data explains where the policies land. And the election results show the fight is not theoretical. It is on the ballot right now. All right. So I know technically we are into hour 2, but we did that at like the 90-minute mark because there was lots of stuff to cover today. But we are going to officially take what would normally be the bottom of the hour 2 break. So coming up, the right cannot answer this by just yelling Marxist. And I've said that over and over again today, especially not all the young folks who complain about things like rent. If socialism gives angry young people a villain, conservatives have to show them where the ladder is. This is Rick Robinson. This is my show, and we'll be back after this short break to finish things off for the day. Want to thank everybody for taking the time to hang out. Yes, even the trolls. Even the trolls. Thank you for helping my numbers grow. Be right back.
Somebody answers. Day or night, they're already moving. Calm voices, fast hands, doing the work while the rest of the world freezes. From a headset to a truck, From a badge to a door, they don't stop to count the cost. They step in when it matters. It's not about being seen, it's about being there. They're holding the line when the lines go dead, standing their ground when the world goes dark. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line through the fire, the flood. When everything falls, they don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. Before the sirens fade, before the scene is clear, someone's already making sense of the moment. Keeping people alive, keeping things from getting worse. Some run toward danger, some stay behind and hold it together. Different roles, same weight, same promise to show up. When everything's on the line, they're already there. They're holding the line when the lines go dead, standing their ground when the world goes dark. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line through the fire, the flood. When everything falls, they don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. This is service, this is sacrifice, this is how lives are saved. No spotlight, no applause, just showing up again and again. They're holding the line when the world goes dark. When everything's breaking, they hold their ground. They're the calm in the chaos, holding the line. So we raise our voices for the ones who stand. Every voice, every badge, every helping hand. They don't ask why, they just answer the call. Always standing in the gap for us all. Always standing in the gap for us all. For those who run and for those who hold steady, for those who stand in the gap.
All right, welcome into the final segment of the Chat Labs Matter Day edition, otherwise known as the Hump Day edition, otherwise known as the Wednesday edition of the Rick Robinson Show, right here live on KLMradio.com. Again, as a reminder, we do this thing every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I had planned on starting the show at noon my time, which would have been 1 Eastern, and then got busy making notes and doing preparation and everything else, and then flipped the switch at my normal time. However, I guess it's a good thing that I did, because we would have been done 10 minutes ago normally. And instead of that, we now are going into technically hour 3. There won't be a full hour 3, I don't think. I don't think there's enough material to make it a full hour 3. But we're here and we're still going. So, yeah. So I guess it kind of worked out anyway. So anyway, if you're just joining us, I've been making the case that the kids are not all right and explaining the reasons why the kids are not all right. And a lot of the YouTube trolls are pissed off at me, even though I've been using data to back up my premises. But let's face it, they are in fact YouTube trolls and should be treated accordingly. So welcome back in. Now comes the part conservatives cannot skip. The answer to all of this cannot just be, well, young people are dumb and socialism is evil. Although you would think that last part would be a foregone conclusion. And so that may feel good to a lot of folks, especially if you're in the middle of an online fight. And for some folks, even face-to-face might feel good for about 8 seconds. But it doesn't win anyone over. If a young person is drowning in rent, student debt, low wages, broken dating culture, bad schools, no home ownership path, and no trust in institutions, and your entire answer is stop being a Marxist, you may be technically correct about Marxism and how they feel about it, but politically and morally useless in that moment. Again, we need to change how we talk to these young people because, again, this just feeds into the idea that either there's been some sort of a breakdown or at some point along the way, it got really easy for young folks for an extended period of time, and now not so much anymore. Because when I was a kid, everybody pretty much understood that whether you went to college or you got out on your own and got a job, you were going to have roommates for a while until you figured some stuff out. This is the only generation that I know of in history that thought splitting bills with folks that weren't related to you was a new concept and that they had invented it. So this worries me because this means they may have a point, or at least otherwise they've been ill-informed. I don't know which one it is. Because as far as I know, for pretty much all of history, until you got married, you usually had to split expenses with people, or you had to have people that stayed with you or helped you with expenses. It's always been a thing. We are pretty much in America the only culture that doesn't have extended family living with us, which I am very grateful for, by the way. But because we didn't have that extended family and everybody pitching in, we started the concept of, hey, we should maybe do these things called roommates. We already had to do it in college. You know, a lot of folks that stayed in dorms got used to having roommates and splitting expenses. So when they got out of the college work and into the workforce, they usually stayed with the roommates. And in most places, you can't survive without them anymore. The entire show concept of Friends wouldn't even work today anymore. They'd be living in a shoebox. So I'm not saying that there aren't reasons that the young people feel like they are under thumb, but I'm saying they're blaming the wrong folks. You keep looking to the government to fix it when the government is the one that keeps making it worse. It's up to you to figure out how to fix it. That is how and where we are failing the young people in America. We aren't teaching them what freedom actually means anymore. We're teaching them government dependency by design. And we can't just keep saying, well, it's not our fault you can't afford rent. We're not giving them solutions. Why are we not looking at these young people and saying, hey, are there any friends you have that you can move in with that can help you divide expenses up so you're not having to come up with it all on your own? Ooh, that's something I hadn't thought of before. And you know how I know it's something they hadn't thought of before? Because again, Gen Z thought they invented the concept of shared living expenses. There was an entire article about it a few months ago, and it blew my mind. These people keep coming up with things that we've known for decades and thinking they're reinventing it. That's funny when you think about it from a headline and a story perspective, but it also proves something else. We're not communicating with this younger generation, or they're not listening. It's one or the other, because there should be no reason that Gen Z can't look back at their millennial parents and go, hey, were you able to move out right away and just be on your own, or did you have to have, people, living with you to share expenses? Probably should have been a discussion that was had by parents with their children a long time ago. I know it was in my house. My dad, after his divorce, lived like a Spartan. He had a 1-bedroom apartment. He ate the same thing for dinner every night for a year. And guess what? It took him 3 years to even get into that apartment. My brother and I were heartbroken because most of the time when it was his weekend, he kept saying, well, I have to work and I have to do this and I have to do that. He didn't want us to know that he was sleeping in the back of my grandpa's shop because he didn't have anywhere else to go. And the thing that I told him once I became an adult is, if you would have told me that, I would have understood a lot more than you're working so hard and so busy that you don't want to spend time with me. But again, men are taught different things. We're not supposed to communicate emotions. As a matter of fact, most of the time when we start communicating emotions, even though that's what the women in our lives say that they want, everything you say when you vent your emotions or discuss your emotions with your partner can and will be used against you in a later fight. So you might as well get prepared for that now. So yes, it's a societal issue. But again, it's also an educational issue because these people have been told America sucks on every level. And then they come out of school angry because they feel like they can't afford anything. And they've gotten this piece of paper that they can't do anything with. Because they were told this will fix everything and put you on the right path. The reason socialism is so popular with our youth is because socialism gives every angry young person who feels overlooked a villain. Conservatism has to give them a ladder. That's the line. Socialism says you are broke because someone else has too much. And I've talked about that before on this very show. We used to be of a mindset in America, and I'm going to give you kind of an illustrative example of, let's picture, late 1930s, dad in a suit, kid wearing his knickers, walking hand in hand down the sidewalk, and all of a sudden this Rolls Royce rolls by, big fancy looking car, especially for that time, long hood, 4 doors, all looks like bright and shiny, and dad happens to see the kid looking over, and it's got a glint in the eye when it comes to the car. And the story used to go like this. Dad used to look at his son and say, "Hey, son, you like that car?" "Yeah, Dad, it's awesome. I really, really like it." Well, this is America, so guess what? You're young, and you're still young enough that if you apply yourself and you work hard enough and your dream is to get that car, then you will have the opportunity to chase that dream and possibly even someday obtain it. That's the difference, because that is saying, hey, son, if there's something that you want, you have the ability to obtain it, but you have to put in the work to be able to do it. And that's the whole point of the American dream. It's not about equity. It's about equality. We are all given the same starting point for the most part. It's up to us what we do with those starting points. And that's just the truth, especially in early American society, because there wasn't this generational wealth thing that we have now. That didn't start until much later. As a matter of fact, most of the wealthy people in America, because they believed in the idea of equal starting points, would start foundations and invest in charities and do all these things with their wealth that they had accumulated, but they would not pass it on to their children because they wanted their children to have to find their own path. Now, we can discuss which way is better, and we may do that on another show. But that's not the point of today's show. The point of this is somewhere along the way that shiny car mindset changed, and it became same scenario, let's say 30 years later, 60s, when communism and progressivism and everything were really starting to take an observable foothold. Communes were popping up. Again, what's the root word of communism? Just saying. And then the mindset changed. Shiny new car rolls by. Dad and son are walking down the street. Dad sees glint in son's eye about said car. "You like that car, do you, son?" "Well, it's not really fair that he has that car, and we're going to figure out how to take it from him, so don't you worry about it." That changes the entire mindset of the son. Instead of having something to aspire toward, he has something to feel negative about. This person has something that, according to my own father, I'm probably never going to be able to get, and it's so bad that he has it that my dad wants to take it away from him. That changes the entire mindset. And that is why this shift is so terrible. And that is why the fact that the DSA having a foothold in deep blue cities and deep blue states should terrify everyone, no matter what your party affiliation is. But all I've been getting from the YouTube trolls all day is, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm retarded. I'm stupid. I'm a white supremacist, and I'm part of the party that protects pedos. That just proves you don't know what the hell you're talking about, because if that's all you have, you're not arguing against my points. You're trying to distract from them. So again, socialism says you are broke because someone else has too much. Again, that car analogy. Conservatism has to say you are broke because government, inflation, credentialism, otherwise known as the extension of credit, regulation, crony capitalism, bad schools, broken families, terrible housing policy, and cultural not having made it harder to start, or having made it harder to start, or cultural rot having made it harder to start. Now, let's work on fixing the latter. That is the better answer. The answer is ownership. The answer is teaching them accountability and self-reliance instead of reliance on the government. But we can't do that because, again, socialism and capitalism cannot survive in the same space at the same time for very long because they are conflicting ideologies. And we have a blend of both existing in America right now. And because those two things are antithetical to one another, they are both falling apart. That's why our system is as broken as it is. That's why we are now, every time you pick up a rock, finding fraud, because the education system for the last 30 years has taught most of these people that are now in the workforce and have access to these NGOs and everything else that America is the sheriff of Nottingham and you get to be Robin Hood and steal from the government to make your life better. And it's okay because America's evil and it didn't deserve to exist in the first place. And that is a problem because we on the right have not been able to get our messaging out strong enough to let people know that's not actually why this stuff is as bad as it is. It's as bad as it is because you keep expecting the government to fix the problem for you instead of you finding your own solution on how to fix it for yourself. I'm going to say this again. When your government is smart enough to put up signs everywhere that say, hey, don't feed the ducks that are in this park, and hey, don't feed the bears, and don't feed this, and don't feed that. But then they're like, oh, would you like some food? Would you like some more? Trust me, when they understand the idea of dependency, especially as a group who believes that we're nothing but a higher form of animal, that's what makes this argument even harder for them to defend. Because I, as a Christian, and I, as somebody who believes that we are created and we do have an inner spirit, etc., can make the argument that we should be able to reason differently than animals. But they can't. They believe we are nothing but a higher form of animal, and that when we die, there's nothing, that we came from nothing and we go back to nothing, which, ironically enough, is the entire argument of Christianity, because we came from God and we return to our God. Since their God is nothing, they still believe in a God. They just think it's nothing, which is a short form irony point you can make to any atheist and probably make their head explode, because that's the truth. So the folks who believe government is the answer, who are smart enough to tell you don't feed the wildlife because they become dependent, even though they believe you're nothing but a slightly higher form of intelligence than that wildlife, they seem to think those same dependency laws wouldn't matter to you. But again, this is about a better answer. The answer is ownership. It's about stewardship. It's about responsibility, not just Wall Street. Ownership, not just GDP charts. Ownership. Own a home. Own a skill. Own your labor. Own a business. Own your future. Own your responsibilities, which means you also have to own your choices that may or may not lead to consequences, and own your family obligations. And thereby, you have part ownership in your community. A country that cannot offer young people a path to ownership should not be shocked when they flirt with ideologies built on confiscation instead of freedom. That is the argument conservatives have to win. Socialism gives angry young people a villain. Conservatism has to give them a path to the ladder. And the irony of, and the reason I keep using the word ladder is because the irony is most of the people that are pushing the ideology of socialism are already part of the elite class. They have family that have already made it. But because, and 9 times out of 10, it's because they do come from people of means and they feel guilty about that, they start pushing for the ideas of socialism. But then it becomes something even worse, because let's not forget, there is still resentment. If you don't believe me, just I would like to remind you that a former president not so long ago called half the country traitors while bathed in red lights draped by American flags and flanked by Marines. There is, in fact, resentment. So the problem becomes twofold. Because they feel guilty about the money that they have, but at the same time, they don't really want anybody else to make it to where they've made it either. So they are using the ideology of socialism and how comfortable and cozy it would be to pull up the ladder behind them because they've already made it, and they're convinced that if we move into a full-on socialistic society, they will still be part of the proletariat. Sad thing is, 9 times out of 10, they're still wrong too, and they wind up back at the bottom. But you can't convince them of that. But the ladder that we have to show them is that your work matters. Your work ethic matters. And again, there is a study that just came out that there is a decline among males of 18 to 25 in proper American work ethic because they are too attuned and accustomed to, well, if I fall down, I'll just go on the government dole. But again, the ladder is work, it's family, safe streets, the ability to put your kids in the schools of your choice, trades, entrepreneurship, small business, lower barriers to entry into the business realm, honest civics that teach the good, the bad, and the ugly, not just that America is evil and deserves to be destroyed, and you should help us make that happen when you enter adulthood. Local responsibility, civic responsibility, consequences. Now, that doesn't mean heavy, just all-out, full-on consequences no matter what. We still have to be able to dole out mercy. There's a reason Lady Justice is supposed to be blind. Along with a healthy and moral defense of private property rights. But again, we don't really have private property anymore either. Because if you own a piece of property, you own a car. For the entire time that you own that car, you have to send money to the state every year for the right to drive that car. It doesn't really do you much good to own it if you can't use it. So you're actually leasing your rights to the road from the state. And then don't even get me started on compulsory insurance because that's another thing that has driven up costs like crazy. That's why I knew the ACA wasn't going to work because they were trying to make insurance compulsory. We saw what happened when they did that with car insurance. Car insurance companies are doing things they're not legally allowed to do, but you don't have a recourse to sue them about it. They're not supposed to be able to check your credit score to determine what your car insurance rates are supposed to be, especially now that it's compulsory. But they do. But we've got to look at the other part of the system too, because a lot of these people feel like capitalism is a rigged casino, and it shouldn't be. It's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a rigged casino where giant corporations get bailouts, because again, that's not capitalism. And normal people get lectures about bootstraps. Capitalism is supposed to be the system where people closest to the work, the risk, and the community have the freedom to build, keep, and pass those things on to their family. That is what we have to defend. And we have to be honest about what young people are actually reacting to. A lot of them are not reacting to free markets. They are reacting to distorted markets. Housing policy that strangled supply. Student loan systems that inflated tuition. Healthcare systems no normal person can understand. But again, when we start talking about all those things, there is a common thread that runs through all of them, even healthcare now, and it's government intervention. Then we have the big corporations that have basically decided to glom on to the government approval by preaching social justice while shipping jobs overseas. Government that prints money as fast as they can print it, which in turn creates inflation, and then acts like young people are irresponsible because groceries cost too much. So the answer is not defending every abuse committed under the banner of capitalism. The answer is defending free enterprise against both socialism and cronyism. The answer is making capitalism look like it's a source of opportunity again. Because here is the truth. You cannot tell a generation to love the free market while they are working 2 jobs, living in their childhood bedroom or their mom's basement, and watching the starter home become a luxury product. But again, that starter home becoming a luxury product isn't the fault of Americans. That's the fault of the government. And we're about to fall into the same trap here. Don't forget, next month, we have a ballot question here in Oklahoma to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour. Now, I'm about to piss off a lot of folks again because I don't think there should be such a thing as minimum wage to begin with. Because when you show someone the floor and you have people willing to exploit one another, all they're ever going to do is pay the floor. So all you're doing is giving people that already probably shouldn't be involved in business ownership in the first place an excuse to be bad business owners. Or you run into folks like me, who when I started my business had to undercut everybody. So I had to, because there was a floor, I would decide how much I would bid based on what that floor was and how much I could pay people versus what my overhead was to be able to keep the doors open. And then minimum wage went up overnight. And all of a sudden, I wasn't able to make ends meet as well anymore. And then Barack Obama was voted into office. And then the rest of the floor fell out from underneath me. And you guys know that have been here long enough know the rest of that story. And it's not because I only wanted to pay that much. It was because that was the only way I could get my foot in the door. And I kept thinking, rather naively, that every time minimum wage went up, I could go back to the people that I had the contracts with and say, hey, now that minimum wage has gone up, we need to renegotiate this thing because it's going to strangle me if we don't. I'll just start taking bids from other people. So yeah, none of this makes communism the right answer, and it doesn't make socialism the correct answer either. It means capitalism's defenders had better start defending the version where regular people can actually start and actually wind up somewhere. And that's how you win this argument, not by pretending the kids are fine, because again, the kids are not all right, but they are also not unreachable. They are reacting to a world where they feel things are too expensive. Schools have become way too political. The cities feel disorderly. The institutions feel dishonest. And the people promising free everything seem to be the only ones admitting something is broken. So conservatives have to admit something is broken too, then offer a better fix. That better fix should include, again, things like freedom, ownership in your future, your ability to work and be responsible for and be proud of your work, your ability to someday, should you decide to do so, start a family of your own. It should also include adherence to laws, public order, opportunity, faith, community, responsibility. That's the ladder. And if we don't offer it, we can't be shocked when young people buy the ideology that at least pretends to see their pain. And that's just it. They're just pretending. All right, so we're into the final segment of the show, which again, timing is a bit off today, but wanted to get through all the notes anyway. So we're going to start the process of landing the plane, so to speak. Do the youth of today prefer communism over capitalism? The sad answer to that, and the truthful answer to that, is that some do. And the ones that outright prefer it may not be a very big number, but too many are actually flirting with the concept around the edges. The deeper truth is this: they were taught everything that's wrong with America, not the cost of what it took to build America. They were taught every sin of capitalism, but too often not the body count of communism with the same moral urgency. They were told wealth is a form of extraction, profit is exploitation, unequal outcomes are oppression, and the government is the fixer of all ills and everything bad, when nothing could be further from the truth. Then they were dropped into an economy where, based on their perception and based on the thought that for some reason they thought they should be able to leave college and move out on their own with absolutely no assistance or roommates or anything else, they've feel like they fell into an economy where rent, food, the lack of big enough paychecks, and debt follows them around like a shadow. Groceries feel like a car payment, and home ownership looks like something their parents found in an old Sears catalog, which unironically is kind of true, because everybody forgets that one of the reasons home ownership used to be so much easier is there wasn't all this overregulation. Now, I'm not saying there weren't reasons that some of these regulations were put in place, but I was astounded to learn that in the early 1900s, you could order a home from the Sears catalog and they would ship you all the stuff to build it yourself. That would be unheard of today for the most part, unless it's one of the prefabs. So yeah, they can and do feel like, maybe this whole Sears catalog analogy may be a little more apt than anybody wants to admit. They were surrounded by activist institutions that know how to turn anger into power. They watched nonprofits, unions, campus groups, DSA, and other socialist adjacent chapters form. And they got into things like legal networks, bail funds, and professional organizers that built machines around their grievances. They watched big city governments take these ideas for a test drive, and then they watched the theories hit the street, which led to increases in things like homelessness or the unhoused, crime, no consequences for said crime, closed stores because of the crime and no consequences of said crime, companies wholesale moving out of counties and states because they couldn't be insured anymore because there were no consequences to crime. Demoralized police because they got tired of showing up and only being able to write a report and issuing a desk summons and realizing these people were never going to show up and it didn't matter anyway. Broken schools that are now too busy teaching LGBTQ than reading, writing, and arithmetic. Cities that cost more and work less, and now everybody wants to act shocked that some young people are looking at the old labels and saying, maybe capitalism actually failed us. No, capitalism did not, in fact, fail him. A distorted, crony, overregulated, badly taught, debt-soaked, inflation-battered, institutionally dishonest version of the American promise failed to make its own case. That is quite different. And that means the answer is not surrender. The answer is a better argument and better results. The right does not need to become socialist light. It needs to become serious. Serious about schools. Serious about history. And actually bothering to teach it again. And I don't just mean the teachers. The right is almost as bad as abdicating their responsibility when it comes to teaching the children in their homes about this country as the left is. And that's bad. Serious about things that used to matter, like safe streets. There's a reason, we talk about being the last generation that was able to go out and play from sunup to sundown. There's a reason that isn't really allowed to happen anymore. Because at some point, people stopped taking things like crime seriously. Serious about the formation of families and sticking with that formation. Serious about your work, being proud of the things that you've accomplished. Realizing that your work ethic matters. Realizing that hard work and work ethic and all of these things that we're talking about can lead to you having ownership of your own life, of your own destiny, and eventually even the place where you decide to live to build those things. But this also means we have to start getting serious about local elections. I say this all the time. National elections are sexy. That's where the money's made. That's where I get paid to talk about things most of the time. But local elections are what shape your future in your neighborhoods, especially the school boards. If you keep letting progressives and DSA light folks control the teaching atmosphere of your children and the curricula that gets shoved down their throat, you don't have anybody to blame but yourselves. This didn't happen overnight. There's a reason I've done 2 shows on a very similar path back to back. The fall of patriotism is directly tied to our education system. The rise in the love of socialism, or at least the idea to experiment with the idea of socialism, is directly tied to the decline in our education system. And none of these things happened by accident. There's a reason the DSA took the mask off. There's a reason they're now willing to have open and public knife fights with the Democratic establishment in deep blue cities, because they understand how much power they now hold. And they're not afraid to hide it anymore. We should have caught this when it was still happening quietly behind closed doors. Because I'm afraid now that the fight has come out and it's public, I think the damage has already been done. We'll know for sure by a week from yesterday. Because if they manage to squeeze out the 2 Republicans using mail-in ballots, and I'm pretty sure they're gonna in California, then we will know exactly how far this fight has gone. And I don't know where we go from there if I'm not wrong. And I pray to God that I am. But we also have to become serious about things like, again, local elections, city council elections, and the people that we allow to hold office on city councils. Serious about local level prosecutors. Serious about school boards, because, again, that's what shapes our children's future. But we also have to be serious about something else, and it's something that a lot of folks don't want to talk about. And that's the fact that the left spent decades building institutions while too many conservatives only showed up every 4 years and wondered why the culture kept moving. Last night's elections did not prove the revolution has arrived. At least we don't think so yet. We'll find out for sure in a week. They proved the pipeline is still running. The far left did not sweep the board, but it kept planting flags. DSA-backed candidates won or advanced in some places where things were deep blue enough. Establishment Democrats held ground in others. Blue cities showed voter frustration. The Democratic coalition fought itself in public. And again, that's rare. But the fact that it's happening now in public and it's an open knife fight between the what I used to call the normal Democrats versus the less normal Democrats to the holy shit, these are batshit crazy communist Democrats. Yeah, that's a Sharks versus Jets thing is happening right in the streets right now. Just saying. And that's the story. Not the takeover, not completely yet. This isn't about a collapse, not yet. This is about a pipeline. It's been around for a long time and nobody wanted to pay attention. This is about the pressure that pipeline has been able to exert, which has led to things like institutional drift, where now we have an entire crop of people being indoctrinated with the idea that America is evil and it deserves to be destroyed, which is why so many of them don't even seem to care that we have now uncovered all of this fraud, waste, and abuse of our tax dollars. Because they don't care, because America's evil. And it just reinforces the idea that the only way anybody ever gets rich is by stealing from somebody else. So, unfortunately, uncovering all of this, while it is a necessary thing, is feeding into the very thing that they have been ideologically taught for their entire educational careers. So the question for the right is whether we are going to keep complaining about the fruit, but ignoring the tree. Because, as I've said all day, the kids are not all right. But they're not totally lost yet. They can still be reached if we take the time to tell the truth. And we tell them the truth about communism and how badly communism works and how badly it fails every time it's been tried. The truth about capitalism and how what we have in America right now is not true free market capitalism, but a mix of capitalism and socialism, and in some cases leaning into outright communism, which has created the very thing that Bernie Sanders likes to scream about, an oligarchy. Because that's what you get when you mix these political systems together. When you don't have a free market anymore and you lean towards socialism ideas in some categories and fear on communist in another, you start creating oligarchies. You start creating areas where there is deep and established cronyism. We got to tell the truth about those things. We have to tell the truth about how broken our schools are. Tell the truth about crime and why consequences to crime should still matter. And again, I'm not saying we as a society have not made mistakes. For the longest time, our legal system has been used to lock up people that we're angry with. We need to get away from that. We need to lock up the people that are actually out to hurt us. And that's why, for the longest time, I was in the camp of criminal justice reform until it got hijacked by the left. And then I had to move away from it because they just took it and they ran with it and they did what they always do. And now there is no criminal justice reform. Because in blue cities and most blue states, there's no criminal justice at all anymore. Just look at what's happened with Mangione. If he gets anything, I predict it will be a slap on the wrist, at least at the state level. The federal stuff, yeah, when they get a hold of him, I wouldn't be surprised if they, yeah. Anyway. We got to tell the truth about what freedom actually requires to be a thing, and then build something worth defending. So do the youth of today prefer communism over capitalism? Again, some do. And even those that don't outright prefer it, too many of them are flirting with the idea. But the deeper truth is this: they were taught the complaints about America, not the cost of America. They were sold grievances, not gratitude for what they inherited when they were born into this wonderful nation. They were organized by people who understand power and understand how grievances and anger can be used to feed into power. And then they were sent into cities where theories finally hit the pavement. The answer in this case is not despair, at least not yet. The answer is to make the better case for freedom, for ownership, for law, for family, for work, for liberty, for the American dream that does not just exist in speeches, but shows up in paychecks, neighborhoods, homes, schools, churches, businesses, and families. If we're not going to have that conversation now, if not now, then when? We are celebrating this year the 250th birthday of the coolest, most grand experiment on the planet. Pardon me. And our founding fathers expected it to last for 50 years. And in some cases, they weren't wrong, because they wouldn't recognize America as it is today. And this is it. If we don't make the case that we should, if we don't tell these people why freedom matters, why America, even though it's flawed, is still exceptional, why America matters because we shaped the entirety of Western civilization. We may not have been the seed point for it, but we changed the entire direction of Western civilization. But those things aren't taught anymore. We don't talk about the fact that a lot of founding fathers didn't even want slavery anymore. There were founding fathers who, as soon as the Declaration of Independence was signed, freed their slaves. Those things aren't talked about. We don't talk about the fact that there were, in fact, freed black slave owners in this country, because it doesn't fit the narrative. America is messy. It's not perfect. It never has been. But it's the closest we've ever had. And our young folks are ready to run away from it. Not to move somewhere where they could already have the ideas that they want, but to change this one. To change it into something that you and I wouldn't recognize, because they don't like it, because they've been taught to hate it, because they don't understand it, because they aren't taught the nuances of American history. That there was no black and white when it came to things like slavery, because there couldn't be. There were founding fathers who wanted slavery eradicated before we ever formed our government. But they knew the southern states that were once colonies wouldn't go along with that. So they came up with the 3/5 compromise. And the 3/5 compromise has been demonized, when in reality, just like Uncle Tom being used as a pejorative, the 3/5 compromise is what eventually led to the freedom of black people. Because the simple truth is that if not for that compromise, the South would have had undue population control over the House. For the same people that keep telling me the parties have switched, for the same people that keep telling me that the slave owners moved to the Republican Party, that the hate mongers moved to the Republican Party, etc., then why are you guys the ones importing brown people to up your stake in the population? And then telling us, well, it doesn't really matter that they're here. It doesn't matter that they're counted in the census because they can't vote. And yet we keep finding over and over again that they do, in fact, vote. So we shouldn't be shocked when we fail to make the case when the next generation goes shopping in the ideological clearance bin, which is where communism should reside. Because again, the kids are not all right. But they are still worth fighting for, and so is the ideology of America. And that means the argument is not over, because in reality, in earnest, it's just starting. So today we started with the question, do young Americans prefer communism over capitalism? The answer is not a simple yes, but the warning signs are real. Polling shows socialism has become more attractive, especially inside the Democratic coalition, including education and academia that have helped normalize the complaints against capitalism while too often softening the cost of communism. Activist networks and the DSA-style organizations have turned anger into infrastructure. Big city policy has turned theory into lived results. And last night's election showed the far left didn't sweep, but the pipeline's still working. The takeaway is simple. Yelling Marxist and throwing chairs and flipping over tables isn't exactly enough. The right has to sell the benefits of ownership again. We're not doing a very good job of that. So that's going to do it for today's Rick Robinson Show. Share the show, hit the replay button, send it to the young person in your life who thinks socialism is just kindness with better fonts, and remind them that freedom may be harder and it's messy, and it's a lot more hard and messier than dependency, but it is still the only system that lets them build something the government does not own. We'll see you next time right here on the Rick Robinson Show. And I apologize. All of a sudden, my allergies are going to town, so we're definitely going to have to get out of here. Again, my name is Rick Robinson. I'll be back tonight starting at 6 p.m. Eastern with a 2-hour Kingdom and Country Bible Study edition. Yes, that was a last-minute decision because I decided it was weird to go from Kingdom and Country into America Off the Rails. America Off the Rails will be assuming G's time slot for most of June and July because he's on summer schedule, which is nuts for him. But for tonight, it'll be an extended Kingdom and Country Bible Study edition, followed by Behind the Enemy Lines, followed by Rick and Orty, which will be our closing act for the night. Again, my name is Rick Robinson. This has been my show. Want to thank everybody, even the trolls, for hanging out with me today. And we'll see you later tonight. Bye, everybody. Remember, America is awesome, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Because if you listen to those folks, you're being lied to. Say goodnight, Gracie.